Good evening, everybody. If you'd like, you can open up your Bibles to Exodus chapter 6. Exodus chapter 6. That's where we're going to pick up with the new material today. But just in the way of review, so Moses has obeyed God's commands, and he's gone and told the children of Israel that God's going to deliver them. And how do they respond? They liked it. They worshiped God. They're happy about this. So far, so good. So he goes to Pharaoh and he says, all right, here's what Jehovah says. Let my people go. And how does Pharaoh like that news?
You don't like it.
He's not even concerned about it. Just, who is Jehovah that I should listen to him? Which we talked about is an important question because everybody needs to know who Jehovah is. Pharaoh needs to know who Jehovah is. Israel needs to know who Jehovah is. Israel needs to know who Jehovah is. And so does the rest of the world. And so Pharaoh's scoffing at this is going to set up the opportunity for everybody to know who Jehovah is. And so that's kind of what we'll be looking at in a lot of the chapters to come here over the next few lessons. Not only that does Pharaoh scoff at it, but what does he do?
Increases the burden on the children of Israel by taking away the straw.
That's right. So he didn't let them go. He made their bondage more severe, so much so that the foremen of them are beaten, and they realize there's no relief, and it says they realized that they were in trouble. And so just so happens they come out from their encounter with Pharaoh, and they walk past Moses. And what's their disposition towards Moses? Yeah, thanks a lot. That's exactly right. And so Moses goes to the Lord in chapter 5 and verse 22, and he says, why? Why have you brought trouble on this people? I don't understand why this is turning out this way. This doesn't seem right. And so the Lord begins to answer in chapter 6 and verse 1, and he says, what I'm going to do is you will see what I do to Pharaoh. For with a strong hand he will let them go, and with a strong hand he will drive them out of this land. And yes, he is going to release them. As a matter of fact, he's going to drive them out. But then verse 2, and God spoke and said to Moses, spoke to Moses and said to him, I am the Lord. All right, I am Jehovah. Now, Pharaoh wants to know who Jehovah is. I am Jehovah. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and Jacob as God Almighty. But my name, Jehovah, I was not known to them. I will also establish my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan. All right, so that's what was promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Verse 5, I've heard their groanings. I've remembered my covenant with them. Verse 6, therefore say to them, I will bring you out from under the hand of the burden of the Egyptians, and I will rescue you from their bondage, and I will redeem you with an outstretched hand. And then verse 7, I will take you as my people, and I will be your God. That's the basis of the covenant that he's going to make with them. And I want you to notice, just going forward, how many times we'll see that statement. You shall be my people, and I will be your God, or I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God. We're going to see that in the covenant that he makes with them, and then a reminder of that covenant all the way through the rest of the Old Testament. And verse 8, I'm going to bring you to the land which I swore. And so he reiterates, I'm the God who remembers the covenant, and I'm going to take this people to be my covenant, and they are going to come out from under Pharaoh. So Moses is saying, I don't understand why is this not working? And God said, it is working, and I'm going to do it. What does Moses need to do? Trust and be patient and wait on the Lord. So verse 9, Moses spoke thus to the children of Israel, but what? They won't listen. Why won't they listen? They're in anguish. Yeah, they're crushed by this. So there's no pep talk that is working right now with the children of Israel. So Israel, as far as their faithfulness and their confidence in Jehovah at this point, they're out. And Moses needed a little pep talk here as well, but Moses is continuing on. Anything you want to add to that?
Maybe they have in their mind that it sounded too good to be true. They were excited at first, but it didn't take much for them maybe to have that mentality of, I knew that was too good to be true, that idea.
Yep,
They don't have any confidence in Moses right now.
that's right. All right, you want to start off in verse 10 there?
Yep. All right, so verse 10, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Go in, tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the children of Israel go out of this land." And Moses spoke before the Lord, saying, "The children of Israel have not heeded me. How then shall Pharaoh heed me? For I am of uncircumcised lips." So he goes back, he tells him to go back to Pharaoh. And Moses' response here is not one of confidence. He has a couple responses. He's like, I got two problems. He's like, the children of Israel are not even on my side now. And also he brings up the I'm of uncircumcised lips that he has brought up before. So we don't see any confidence even, it seems like, from Moses here. He seems a little bit down on this situation now. He doesn't have many people on his side in this now. But in verse 13, the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron and gave them a command. Uses a different word there now for the children of Israel and for Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to bring the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. So he tells him that go, just go. It's worded as a command here. I think I have a charge is another wording of that. So the Lord is being patient with Moses in a lot of ways. He has gotten a little angry with him a couple times. He's been pretty forward with him, but he is being patient with him. But he hasn't backed down on what he originally said. You're going to do this, and it's going to be through you, and you're going to go, and you're going to keep going to Pharaoh as I tell you to go to him, and I'm going to do this, and I will, as we read in the verses there at the beginning of chapter 6.
Yeah, one thing that stands out to me here is how's Moses thinking this should work? What's it going to take to make this work in Moses' mind right now, it seems, from this verse?
The children of Israel.
I've got to speak really well. And that's the problem. I'm not real convincing when I speak. And God's like, that's not the problem. Let me ask you this. Let's say Moses was one of the best orators in the world. Do you think that he's going to change Pharaoh's mind?
No. God done told him
Yeah.
at the get-go he's going to refuse to let them go, and the people ain't even going to be with you.
Yeah. And so I think that's an important lesson for us, is that he's looking at it and he's thinking, okay, the way that we can make this work is by me being exceptional and speaking to Pharaoh. And that's not God's plan. Now, let me ask you this. I'm trying to make a little application here and thinking about how we make excuses and maybe limitations in our minds sometime. How are we going to teach somebody the gospel? Well, I've got to be really persuasive. I've got to say just the right thing. I've got to have all the answers.
Now you've got to be able to just tell it.
You got to know the truth, and you got to tell it. And that's exactly right.
You got to tell it.
Yeah.
And God gives the increase, I think.
That's exactly right. So that's I think a good lesson that Moses needs to learn here is he's still thinking, and naturally so, because that's how we think that things operate. But when God gives us a charge, then we do it, and we trust that who made man's mouth? He can use us in whatever capacity he sees fit. He can make Moses a great orator if that's what he wants to accomplish. In this case, it's not going to be through Moses' speech that Pharaoh ends up letting the children of Israel go. So I think that is just trying to figure out Moses' thinking as he goes through is helpful to me and maybe making some corrections in my life. Anybody got anything else through verse 13? All right, this next section starts off with, these are the heads of their fathers' houses. There's an interruption right here, all right? So, and we're going to come right back. So it's almost like we back up 5 seconds and pick back up here in just a minute. You notice that the last thing Moses says here is, well, I'm of uncircumcised lips. And God says, don't worry about that. But then we have this break in verse 14 that starts talking about the heads of the fathers' houses. And it starts off And we think we may going to list all 12 sons here because we start off with the firstborn Reuben and his firstborn, and then we talk about verse 15, the sons of Simeon are this, and then verse 16, the sons of Levi. And then the rest of the text are just about the sons of Levi. We don't go on to the other sons of Jacob. And because what we're doing here, like a lot of genealogies that we've seen thus far in the Bible, is we're looking for some particular pattern. It's not just, hey, let's just list everybody. It's that there's something that the writer is trying to get to, or God's trying to get to in listing these. In this case, what he's trying to get to is he's trying to get to understand who is this Moses and Aaron that are speaking, that God has chosen to lead these people out of Egypt and to speak before Pharaoh and to give God's instruction to the children of Israel. Who are they? Well, they're the families, they're the descendants of Levi. Levi had 3 sons, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. We're going to focus in on Kohath. Kohath had Amram. Amram had Aaron and Moses. All right, so we're familiar with them on this. Aaron had Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. And then thrown in for a bonus, Eleazar had a son named Phinehas. And we're going to see all of these in the upcoming events that take place. These are going to be key players in God bringing out the children of Israel to be his special nation. So they're introduced here, and then you notice how this ends in verse 27. These are the ones who spoke to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to bring out the children of Israel from Egypt. These are the same Moses and Aaron. And so here's their background. They're from the tribe of Levi. Why will that be significant? We'll have to wait and see, but it's introduced here.
But the other main point of all of this going through the lineage is at the time of Moses writing these, the children of Israel needs to know what the lineage is and what God went through to encourage them to follow his commandments, to go on and do what God wants them to do. Because up to this time, until the Torah or whatever was wrote and given to them, all they had was word of mouth that was done by the forefathers.
That's right. Any other thoughts? Anything you want to add on the genealogy there? Any other points that you think are significant?
One thing, you made a comment back when I was listening to it on the recording. The priestly line that we see lined up there, coming through Aaron. You know, some people claim the Bible is just some made up stories. You know, Moses maybe made some of this up, but if Moses was making this up, the point was kind of made. You know, he didn't use his own family as the priestly line. It was through his brother. So that was just kind of a point that was made. Why wouldn't he make his descendants be that special group that was going to serve the Lord as priest? And he didn't, because it's not a story that he made up. He's recorded it the way that God wanted it to be and the way that it really happened.
You want to take us back to 28?
Okay. We see a little bit of the same stuff at the end there, starting with 28 and through the beginning of 7. 28, it came to pass on that day the Lord spoke to Moses in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord. That the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, I am the Lord. Speak to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, all that I say to you. But Moses comes back with the same excuse. But Moses said before the Lord, behold, I am of uncircumcised lips. How shall Pharaoh heed me? So we have the same back and forth that we just had a discussion on, going back, happening between them. And the Lord answers him again. The Lord said to Moses, see, I have made you as God to Pharaoh. So that's a different wording than we had. You know, Moses versus Pharaoh, most people would look at those two and not think that Moses seemed like he had the upper hand here in any way. But the Lord words it to him that I have made you as a God to Pharaoh, and Aaron your brother shall be your prophet. So he refers to them in this metaphor in that way as the relationship to Pharaoh. And the Lord tells him the same things. You shall speak what I command you. Aaron your brother shall tell Pharaoh to send the children of Israel out of this land. Now I will harden Pharaoh's heart, multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt. Verse 4, again, Pharaoh will not heed you, so that I may lay my hand on Egypt and bring my armies and my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great judgments. And then verse 5, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand on Egypt and bring out the children of Israel from among them. So he re-says a lot of the same things. It feels like we're reading the same conversation over and over again here. But there are some points. I'm going to make you as a god to Pharaoh. And by the time this is over, the Egyptians are going to know who, Pharaoh had that comment earlier. Who is the Lord? Who's your God that I should even listen to him? And by the time this is over, not just Pharaoh, but all the Egyptians are going to know who the Lord is after he's done doing the things that he's going to do.
In this, one thing that I want to point out, we're going to notice a phrase over and over again, hardened heart. And God's already mentioned that he's going to harden Pharaoh's heart. Here in this passage, he mentions he's going to harden his heart. And I think that's in response to Moses saying, well, look, I'm just not convincing enough to persuade Pharaoh. And God's like, no, Pharaoh's going to have a hard heart on this. And that's okay. That's according to my plan. As a matter of fact, I have that built in the plan. But I want us to notice this chart kind of shows the different references and the way that it's worded. So we have a number of times where God says, I will harden Pharaoh's heart. But then we have other times where it just says Pharaoh's heart was hardened, not indicating who's doing the hardening. And then we have some references where Pharaoh hardened his heart. And so I think there's some confusion about that. I think those that hold a more Calvinistic perspective like to say, see, God hardened Pharaoh's heart. In other words, he made Pharaoh the way he wanted Pharaoh to be. Pharaoh didn't have any choice in it. But I think the text itself indicates that, yes, God worked circumstances in connection with Pharaoh's disposition that resulted in the hardness of Pharaoh's heart. But do you think Pharaoh had any choice in this or not, or was Pharaoh forced, whether he wanted to or not, to be rebellious towards God? Yes. And I think that's helpful to us because, and you know what, if you know somebody really well, you know how to do this as well. This is an overly simplistic. When a toddler's going through the terrible twos, what's their favorite word? So what do you learn to do as a parent? Do you mind going and getting daddy that? No, thank you. Please go and do so. And I know that's overly simplistic, but we anticipate a disposition and a reaction, and so we tailor our response and interaction with this person in that regard. And that's exactly what God's doing. God raised up a man to sit on the throne who was proud and arrogant and did not like to submit. And then what does God ask him to do? Submit. You could figure out what the reaction is going to be, couldn't you? The reaction is going to be no. And by the way, as we look at the plagues and the signs, I think that we can even see in the signs how God is using those particular signs in the order that he gave them in to cause Pharaoh to stiffen and to harden. And why didn't God just give the 10th plague first and be done with it? You know? In other words, God wanted a series of signs and power shown. So he started with those that Pharaoh would resist. We'll see that as we get into it, I think.
Plus, it also made, by it done at those levels, the world knowed about each one of them, and they were more believing that there was a true God.
Sure, that's right. That was the purpose. That was the purpose. All right, so how old is Moses at this point? And how old is Aaron? Yeah, 83. He's 3 years older than Moses. So we learn that here in verse 7. So verse 8 says, Then the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, When Pharaoh speaks to you, saying, Show a miracle for yourselves, then you shall say to Aaron, Take your rod and cast it before Pharaoh, and let it become a serpent. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh, and they did so, just as the Lord commanded. All right, so they're doing it just the way the Lord commanded to do. Aaron cast down his rod before Pharaoh and his servants, and it became a serpent. But Pharaoh also called for wise men and the sorcerers. Anybody have a different word for sorcerers there? Wise men, magicians, soothsayers, anything else? All right. So the magicians of Egypt, they also did in like manner with their enchantments, is the New King James. Anybody have a different word there? Secret arts. Okay. Now, the very first sign was to be take the rod and throw it down and it'll become a serpent. Interestingly enough, we have some records that would indicate, historical records that would indicate that the Egyptians at least made the boast in ancient times of being snake charmers that could turn snakes into sticks. In other words, they think that they would pretty much hypnotize them or lull them to sleep and straighten them out so that they would be stiff and look like a stick. Now, isn't it interesting that here was a trick that they had mastered, and what does God start off with? A genuine miracle that looks very similar to the trick. Why would he start off with that? There could be confusion over that.
No, it was to prove the point.
I think that's exactly right. So when they were able to perform this, Pharaoh had to think, whoa, now, is that a true sign of God or not? Hey, enchanters, come here. Wise men, come here. Tell me, what about this? What do y'all think? Oh, we can do that. And they did something similar. And so now what is Pharaoh thinking? Huh.
You think it ain't
Moses
big
kind of
deal
looks like
until those average snake swallows
All right, so it still looks like a good competition going on here until, what does Aaron's snake do? What would that indicate? Up to this point, maybe we could say, all right, tit for tat, both have been able to perform this miracle. But now what do we see? What would your conclusion be if Aaron's serpent swallows up their serpents? That's superior. So here's what I want you to see, what Pharaoh is able to see here. As a proud, arrogant man, a sign is given to show that this God is real, and his magicians are able to perform something that at least looks similar to this. At this point, this would be enough evidence to harden his heart further and say, I'm not listening to you. But in this evidence is also evidence that at the very least, this God is more powerful than the gods that these magicians are claiming to follow. So the reason that I think that is significant is I have thought about different things regarding the debate of the age of the earth and evolution versus creation and so forth. Is there any evidence in nature that looks like it could support the theory of evolution? I believe there is. I believe there's a lot that looks like it possibly could.
If it did, it'd still be going on.
Well, I'm talking about the geological record. Yeah, the geological record. The strata look like, okay, yeah, this could be laid down over hundreds of thousands, millions of years until you come across something that contradicts that, like a petrified tree that sticks through 15 layers of strata that were supposedly laid down. There's no way that could have been petrified if it was exposed. And I'm not trying to get into all that, but what I'm saying is God allows there to be, well, 2 Thessalonians talks about the fact that he will send a strong delusion to those who do not love the truth. I think that's exactly what he's sending to Pharaoh here, is a strong delusion. In the fact that their magicians could do something that looked similar was sufficient evidence for him, since he did not want to believe this and did not love the truth, to say, yeah, I'm not going along with that. Now, that's at the beginning. So hold on to that. All right. So anything more you want to say about this first son?
No, I believe you said it all.
So verse 13, Pharaoh's heart grew hard. He did not heed them. And who predicted that? Just as the Lord said. Very good.
So, it's a progression here, as we said. And in verse 14, the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hard. He uh, he refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning when he goes out to the water. You shall stand by the river's bank to meet him, and the rod which was turned into a serpent you shall take in your hand. And you shall say to him, The Lord, God of the Hebrews, has sent me to you, saying, Let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. But indeed, until now, you would not hear. And there's an exclamation mark there, if that's how God wanted him to say it to Pharaoh. Thus says the Lord, by this you shall know that I am the Lord. Behold, I will strike the waters which are in the river with a rod that is in my hand, and they shall be turned to blood. And the fish that are in the river shall die, and the river shall stink, and the Egyptians will loathe to drink the water of the river. So we see the Lord is not, he knows, he knew this was going to happen. He's just ready for the next step in the process. And he explains it to Moses how it's going to work. You're going to go to Pharaoh, and you're going to tell him the same thing again, same thing that I've told you to tell him over and over again. You're going to strike the water, and the water's going to turn to blood. This is going to be our next sign that we're going to do. So in verse 19, the Lord spoke to Moses, say to Aaron, take your rod, stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over the streams, over the rivers, over the ponds, and over all the pools of water, that they may become blood. And there shall be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in buckets of wood and pitchers of stone. And Moses and Aaron did so, just as the Lord commanded. So he lifted up the rod and struck the waters that were in the river, in the sight of Pharaoh, and in the sight of his servants. And all the waters that were in the river were turned to blood. And the fish that were in the river died, and the river stank, and the Egyptians could not drink the water of the river. So there was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. So it didn't just happen there, locally, right in front of Pharaoh. This was something that happened throughout the entire land. And it was the pools and the ponds and the water people had drawn up into a pitcher and the buckets. Everything turned. So you can imagine how shocking this would be, and also how serious. I mean, all of a sudden we're without water. And it talks about it happened throughout the whole land. We're going to see some things later that some of these may not happen or are not going to happen throughout the entire land. But we see this first plague. This is the first plague that we call throughout the land of Egypt. You have anything you want to say before we talk about Pharaoh's response there?
No, let's see. No.
All right, so he does like he did before. He calls on his magicians. The magicians of Egypt in 22 did so with their enchantments. And again, Pharaoh's heart grew hard, and he did not heed them as the Lord had said. And Pharaoh turned and went into his house, neither was his heart moved by this. So all the Egyptians dug all around the river for water to drink, because they could not drink the water of the river. 7 days passed after the Lord had struck the river. So this goes on for a week here. But it doesn't, I mean, it's definitely a bad thing going on there. People are scrambling. I mean, I imagine everything stopped except for trying to find water. Like commerce stopped. Like all the projects that were going on, the daily lives are just throughout all the land are shut down here, and people are trying to dig and find water.
Everything in Egypt revolved around this river.
Yes.
The Nile River is what brought life to it. It was nothing without it.
They worshiped it.
They did. And I'm not learned enough to be able to go through with each plague, but I know that there are scholars who say that each one of these plagues was directed at a different deity that the Egyptians worshiped. The Nile was one of their goddesses, and here Jehovah is directing judgment directly upon one of their life-giving gods or goddesses. And so this was a judgment on them in that regard. The kicker here to me is with this, that again God chose to do something. God chose to do something that they were able to replicate in some way. Later on, they're not going to be able to replicate it. Why didn't he start with those? I think he started with things that they could replicate because it gave Pharaoh the opportunity to harden his heart even more. I don't know exactly how they were doing this. Some I think make the argument that they had some type of evil power that they could perform some miracle. I don't see that the text demands that. It seems to me that what they're doing is they're using trickery. I remember in sixth grade science class that my teacher wowed us by having 3 glasses of clear liquid, and he poured one glass into the other glass, and as he poured it in, it turned blue. And then he took that blue glass and he poured it into the third glass, and it turned red. And we were like, wow, how do you do that? Well, it was different chemicals in there that reacted differently when they were combined, and it changed the color of it. Is that what these magicians were doing? Maybe. I envision it that way. I don't know if that's exactly the way it was or not. But however this was, what would have been really good for the magicians to do?
Turn the
Blood back to water.
Yeah, like that would be really helpful, because here, if your opponent is showing his great power by ruining your drinking water, it would be really nice if you could bring in your top guns and they could turn it right back to drinking water, and you could say, so there. But all they were able to do at the very best was to make more undrinkable water. And so it doesn't really help. But remember how Moses started off this first sign in verse 17. Thus says the Lord, by this you shall know that I am the Lord. By this sign alone, Pharaoh had enough information to know who Jehovah was. But he chose not to. He chose not to. So another plague is going to be necessary in this. Any thoughts on this before we move on?
It's just like you said. When Moses and Aaron spoke to Pharaoh, they didn't say, we are doing this. They said, the Lord is telling you, and if you don't do what he says, he's going to do this. They never took responsibility of what they were performing in God's control, that it was from them.
Yeah.
They always said, God said, let them go. This is what God's going to do to you.
That's right.
So, not to spoil what's going to happen later, but we do see there are times where Pharaoh asks for something to be relented. He doesn't seem to do that here.
No.
Why do you think that's the case? Why with the other ones not? Does this one not last very long? I mean, we see 7 days pass. I don't know if that means 7 days it was like this.
So was there no drinking water to be found?
They could dig.
They were able to.
Somebody was digging.
That's right. Somebody was. That's exactly right. So once they figured out, hey, we can dig shallow wells and find drinkable water, Pharaoh had water. And I do think that these plagues start off with where, I'm not saying that's inconvenient. When my well pump goes out, it's very inconvenient, but it's not life-threatening. We're able to get water somewhere. This wasn't apparently life-threatening because they were able to find water, but it was a major inconvenience. It was enough information that he could know, but not enough information that he's begging for relief. And that's my thinking on it.
I know they can survive it. So what Colby said, if they relied on that much, I just think that it would be maybe more catastrophic.
I think about all the fish in the river dying. That I am sure that was a large
That was my thoughts. exactly.
source of their commerce, And
I think just this one plague alone would have been enough to
yeah,
Shut them down.
yeah, no,
it would have been great magnitude for that civilization.
yep.
Maybe he's too stubborn to at this point to, concede that God is powerful.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think his stubbornness is exemplified in all of these along the way. And I would say, oh, he's the most stubborn man ever. But you know what? I've talked to people that God had. I would say that God at least could be chastening them and has crushed their health, taken away all kinds of things, and still they're just as defiant against God as they can be. And so I've seen that firsthand myself. And so I would look at this and say, I can see how a man like Pharaoh would be obstinate in this too.
God's just breaking Pharaoh down a little bit further.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
it's going to get to the point where he's a broke man.
Yeah.
And he's also teaching the Egyptians as a whole, also with the Israelites, who he is and what he can do.
Yes.
So there's more than just Pharaoh involved.
Yes,
That's right.
All of Egypt will know that I'm the Lord.
Yep. That's right. All right. Chapter 8.
All right, so 7 days passed there, and the Lord spoke to Moses, go to Pharaoh, say to him, thus says the Lord, let my people go, that they may serve me. So he makes sure that he reminds him of what we're asking for here, whenever he does decide to change his mind. But if you refuse to let them go, behold, I will smite all your territory with frogs. So the river shall bring forth the frogs abundantly, which shall go up and come into your house, and into your bedroom, and on your bed, and into the houses of your servants, on your people, into your ovens, and into your kneading bowls, and the frogs shall come up on you, on your people, and on all your servants. So the Lord explains the next one to Moses here, before he goes and orchestrates it. And then the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, stretch out your hand with your rod over the streams, over the rivers and the ponds, and cause the frogs to come up out of the land of Egypt. So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. But again, here, as they did before, the magicians did so with their enchantments, and brought up frogs on the land of Egypt. So again, that's kind of like Lonnie said, frogs everywhere, and what's their match to that? More, multiplying the problem more than fixing the problem. But frogs everywhere, and it gives us enough of a description there to get an idea that they're not just a lot more frogs around the river than there normally are. There seemed like the frog hatch did well this year. It's definitely they're everywhere. They're getting in their houses, in all their bowls and in their beds, to the point that it would disrupt their everyday life. Imagine not being able to get up in the middle of the night and walk across the floor without stepping on frogs, and frogs climb. You can't sleep because there's frogs everywhere. And imagine the noise, at night, just all the different discomforts that would come from having a lot of frogs. Now, it's not life threatening, I don't guess. It's just inconvenient.
I'm pretty sure my wife would have a heart attack if there was a frog in our bed. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, but verse 8 is where I got to there. Then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, so we have a different response here now. Entreat the Lord that he may take away the frogs from me and from my people. So this one got to him a little bit more. And he said, and I will let the people go that they may sacrifice to the Lord. So we get a totally different response from him here. Pharaoh asked them to stop it. And he said, all right, I'll let them go. Just stop this one. End this one. And Moses said to Pharaoh, accept the honor of saying, when I shall intercede for you, for the servants, and for your people, to destroy the frogs from you and your houses, that they may remain in the river. So he said, tomorrow. And he said, let it be according to your word, that you may know that there is no one like the Lord our God. So he comes to Moses and says, Moses, all right, I'll let you go. Can we do that? And Moses asked him, and he says, tomorrow. But Moses says, but just know that there is no one like the Lord our God. And the frogs shall depart from you, and from your houses, from your servants, and from your people, and they shall remain in the river only. I'll just finish up here, and we can discuss through the end of this one in case we don't have time to get to the next one here. So the Lord did according to the word of Moses, and the frogs died out of the houses, out of the courtyards, and out of the fields. And they gathered them together in heaps, and the land stank. But when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he hardened his heart and did not heed them, as the Lord had said. So we have a totally different response from Pharaoh here. He comes to him and asks him to make it stop. And Moses says, okay. And just know though that the Lord our God is the one who's doing this, and He did. They did make it stop. It talks about imagine how many the cleanup of this. The whole country was just in cleanup mode. Just they didn't have anywhere to put them. They just piled them up. It says, and they stank, and it was nasty. But Pharaoh, being the person that we have described him to be, when he had some relief, he changes his mind again and hardened his heart there.
Yeah, I wonder if he talked to his magicians and said, "Hey, can y'all guys do something about this? Can you get rid of these guys?" And they were like, "No." And it's like, "All right, well, let's see if Moses can get rid of them then." And said, "All right, I'll tell you what, I'll let you go. You get rid of them. All right, well, when do you want me to get rid of them? What would you say?" Immediately. And that's not what he says. Tomorrow. Okay, then tomorrow. Put up with them one more night. And so sure enough, the next day, all the frogs are dead in a day. And now, the conditions that we have with the river turning to blood, they've already had a pretty stinky week beforehand, right? It said the river stank, and now they got decomposing frogs everywhere. And, everybody's got to be realizing, wow, look at what's going on here. I mean, our land is nasty right now because we keep refusing to heed. And then Pharaoh takes this opportunity to say, yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. And his heart, and you notice here is one of those places where it said that he hardened his heart and did not heed them. Is this a surprise to God? No. And it's just the way that God said it would be. And so I think Pharaoh's making the choice to do this. God already knew the choice that he would make. Any other thoughts, comments?
So did these frogs infiltrate Egypt and then die? Or what? I mean, did they just overwhelm everybody, and once they got in a position to die, and rotted and sank the whole place up?
That's what it seems to me. Yeah. It says they came out of the river. And so I don't know if this was natural number of frogs that would normally live in the uninhabited places, and now they just all come into the inhabited places of the people, or if this is an additional amount of frogs that would not be normal. But yeah, it seems that they come into everybody's houses and then just die there. And so it's interesting that God didn't say, all right, let them go back in the river. That's not how he got rid of them. He just let them die right where they were at, and everybody do cleanup and smell them. And maybe a little bit more powerful reminder of what's taking place there. And so it wasn't like, wow, that was weird. They came up and they left. No, they came up and they died here because we asked for them to be gone. And so
it's interesting that it says that they came out of the river. And it's interesting that it's right after the turning of water to blood because, and I don't know how accurate it is, but if you look up just Egyptians and frogs, it says that the frog was a symbol of fertility and water. So to the Egyptians, I don't know if that's accurate or not, but it's interesting that that goes right along with them coming out of the river and being right after turning the water to blood.
yeah. So the Nile River, the mother of life to Egypt, everything dies in it. And then the frogs, what you're talking about, a symbol of fertility, die there in their houses. God's bringing them down here. God's bringing them down. All right. Any final thoughts, comments? Anything you want to add? Now, the next plague, the third plague, will be different. But we'll have to wait till next time to see how. Thanks for your good attention. Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.